Welcome back everybody to another episode of KaijuVFX. Today we are going to be recreating Super Mechagodzilla's shock anchors and Mega Buster as requested by Patreon supporter, That One Godzilla Fan. So getting started here, we have our shot of Super Mechagodzilla already in a environment with the color grading and everything going on, but we don't need those, so we'll just disable those for now. So what we're going to do is we're going to create the shock anchors first that come from these little openings and protrusions on Mechagodzilla's forearms and wrists as they shoot forward and aim at some target off screen, I suppose. And then we'll animate lightning bolts that streak down those anchors. So to get started here, first thing that we're going to do is create a new null object. So we'll hit Control-Alt-Shift-Y. We'll just scale this down a little bit. And so we're going to just animate the position of this null object to begin when we want the shock anchor to fire. We'll go for maybe a second. And then we'll just drag it forward into a straight line. That's something that looks like it would be in a good path. And then we'll rename this to right anchor null. And then we'll duplicate this and rename it to left anchor null. Go into the keyframes of this and change the position animation to come from the second shock anchor behind Mechagodzilla. So we'll go there. We'll drag that out over this way. We can offset this by a couple of keyframes as well, just to add a little bit of variation. One anchor fires and then the other just shortly after. And so now what we're going to do real quick is create the anchor itself. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new gray solid, and we'll call this anchor. And we're just going to draw a simple shape of the shock anchor, not going off of anything in particular, but we'll just do kind of like an arrowhead type shape, something that you might find, buried in the ground, just a little spearhead type deal. Something like this works fine. Set the anchor point to the base of it so that if we rotate it, it's rotating right along that anchor point. Just to add a little bit of texture. It's going to be very small and far away, so we don't need to do too much, but we'll add a bevel alpha and just make it look a little three-dimensional. Maybe play with the light property and type. We can add grain to this just to give it a little bit of texture. Maybe play with the intensity and size. We'll get rid of the color. Just play around with this and see what we come up with. Maybe we'll put that before the bevel alpha. So that's not looking too bad, honestly. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the first frame the shock anchor fires. We're going to position it to where we want it to emerge from Mechagodzilla's forearm here. And we're going to go ahead and parent this, take the little pick whip here, and parent it to the right anchor null. And so what that does, that means that we don't have to animate the position property of the anchor itself at all. It simply just follows the null object's position. And so it goes ahead and fires off. And we can maybe play with the rotation of this a little bit just to have it match the angle that it's firing at a little more. Maybe a little bit more down that way. So that's not too bad. But obviously what we need now is we need a wire that connects from the anchor tip to the point that the anchor emerges from Mechagodzilla's forearm. So what we're going to do for this is we're going to go ahead and create a new black solid, and we'll call this anchor wire. And what we're going to do is we're going to go to the frame, the final frame that the anchor moves. And we're just going to draw a simple mask from the end of the anchor, make it a little bit wavy, to the end of Mechagodzilla's forearm. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a stroke effect. So as you can see, what that does is once we add that, it adds a line to the mask path that we created. And real quick, we'll add a shift channels effect, and we'll take the alpha from the luminance. And so we can play with the thickness of this line. We can change the color. We'll maybe change it to a bit of a darker gray just by adding a hue and saturation effect. And let's go ahead and move all these below the foreground tree layer. And so we'll go to the first frame that the anchor fires again. We'll move this layer. Oops, don't want to move the trees. We'll move this to be attached right about there to the anchor tip. And again, we're just going to parent this to the right anchor null. So what that does is the wire moves along with the anchor tip. And the reason that we're using a mask with a stroke effect is because, as you can see, as it fires, we've made this kind of like wavy shape to make it look a little bit more natural, but obviously it's in just one static position and it kind of gets offset from the wrist point there. So we're going to go into the mask and set a keyframe for the mask path. Unhide those. Go to the last frame and make sure that this mask is reaching out all the way that we want to, and that we want this to be our resting point. And so we'll just kind of go through here and animate the mask path just to make sure that it is following through and staying in the range of Mechagodzilla's forearm this whole time. Alright, so we've got that set in motion, and then we'll just kind of go along and add some wiggle to this mask, like it's kind of waving in the wind, shaking from the impact of hitting whatever target, probably Godzilla. We'll make those ease keyframes as well. It's not looking too bad. And maybe we'll add a little bit more texture to this wire by just copying these effects that we have from the anchor tip and just playing with the settings a little bit just to give it some more texture. Make it look not as bland and static as before. And so real quick, I'm just going to duplicate this process for the left anchor null. So we'll just copy those, paste them, and we'll just change the keyframes around a bit. And this time we're going to want to parent them to the left anchor null. So I'm going to go ahead and just fix all this around real quick, and we'll be right back. Alright, so we've got both the shock anchors anchored at a little bit of an offset and coming from each of Mechagodzilla's respective arms. So real quick, just to add a little bit more blending to these, I'm going to go ahead and enable motion blur on all of these layers, and also just enable motion blur for the composition. And that'll just give them a little bit more natural look as they zoom on out of Mechagodzilla's arms. So now the question is, how do we get rid of these extra little bits that are back here? Since we parented these to the null to better animate them along a straight path, we want to find some way to just cut these off. And it's pretty simple. So we're just going to select all of the points for one of the anchors. We'll do these one at a time. So first we'll do right. We're going to select all the layers and pre-compose them. We'll call this right arm anchor. Hit OK. And just simply draw a mask around that arm. Hit M, change the property subtract, add a couple pixels of feather. Maybe just one will do. And there you go. So now we do not see the anchor coming from behind Mechagodzilla from nowhere. And so we'll just repeat the process again with the left arm anchor. Just draw a quick mask around here. Nothing too difficult. So now that we've got the anchors going and in place, the next step is to make them shock, as they are shock anchors after all. So what we're going to go ahead and do is create a new black solid, and we'll call this lightning bolt 1. We're going to add an advanced lightning effect to this layer. And we'll change the lightning type for now to strike. We'll go forward a bit to when the anchors are just kind of in place. So real quick, one thing we're going to change about this lightning bolt is we're just going to go into the glow settings and set that opacity to 0. Because the default glow that comes with this lightning is ugly, frankly. And we don't need to worry ourselves with that. So we'll just kind of play with the start and end points of this a little bit. Doesn't really matter too much how it looks because we're not going to be animating the origin and direction. And so we're just going to go to the core settings, set the opacity to 100. Play around with the core radius a bit. And so we'll just see how quick we want these lightning bolts to go. We'll probably go forward to like 5 or 6 frames. We're just going to animate the conductivity state of these, which basically just makes them scatter a little bit as the animation goes on and adds just more randomness. So it's kind of going a little bit too crazy for my taste. So what we're going to do actually is we're going to turn down the turbulence just a little bit, but we're also going to increase the forking. That's looking pretty good. Doesn't go too wild. So instead of animating this lightning based on the origin and direction, we're just going to animate the layer itself and just make it a little bit easier on ourselves. So we'll just start, at the beginning of the anchor here, and we'll animate the position to have this bolt move down the line. Alter the keyframes a little bit just so it travels along the path. Honestly, we can make it go even faster just to make it that much more shocking. Something like that doesn't look too bad. And we're not going to enable motion blur for these just because if we do, they look less like lightning bolts and more just like little streaks. But if you want, you can duplicate it and have one bottom layer be the motion blur and the top one be that crisp lightning bolt. And so you get kind of both of those effects going along, which looks pretty nice. And we might play around with that a little bit. So we're going to fix up the glow on this a little bit. And what we're going to do with that is, well, first we're going to add a solid composite to the advanced lightning effect. Make that black, because that's going to let us color correct this. Change the blend mode to screen. We'll add a curves adjustment. Up the blues and the greens. Add a glow. You know the drill. Glow operation is screen A and B colors. Sawtooth A is greater than B, which lets us colorize the glow to be more of a vibrant blue color. We'll just play around with the threshold and radius, duplicating the layer or the effect a couple times. And we get something cool like that. And we can copy and paste all these onto the motion blur version. Just add a little bit more glow onto it. And so that's one lightning bolt moving down the shock anchor. But obviously we want more of these. So really just gotta duplicate these and fix up the position properties a little bit. offset them a little bit, you know, all that good stuff, and you get stuff that looks pretty neat. So I'm just going to go ahead and go through and duplicate these a couple times and do all that nice stuff. So I'll be right back. And there we go. That finishes off the shock anchor effect, the basics at least. And with the stuff that I've taught you here, you know, you can make your target get shocked. You know how to do that now. If you want, you can add some extra little touches like I probably will using stock footage when the anchors emerge and when they hit their target. All that good stuff. But, you know, that's stuff that you can experiment with on your own. We're here to talk about the shock anchors themselves, and that's exactly what we've done. And we've recreated the effect in the 93 film pretty well, I would say. And obviously, you know, you can reverse these lightning bolts and recreate the scene where Godzilla reverses the shock back into Mechagodzilla. You know, change the color of those and all that. Alright, and now in this second short part, we're going to cover creating Mechagodzilla's Mega Buster, that rainbow beam that comes from his mouth. So we're going to go ahead and just get through this real quick. Nothing too complex. We're just going to make a new solid real quick. We'll call this Buster 1. New black solid. And we're going to add a CC particle world effect. You could use trapcode particular for something like this, and honestly it would be a little bit more intuitive to do it that way. But for the sake of not having to utilize paid third-party plugins, we are going to go ahead and just use the built-in CC particle world effect and see what we can make this way. So to start off, we're just going to set the animation to fire like we always do for this. And just sort of angle the beam to be coming from Mechagodzilla's mouth. We'll go into the producer settings and maybe play around with the radius a little bit that the beam emits from. Something like that. That should work fine. And so we'll lower the amount of gravity so that these particles are just coming basically from a straight stream from Mechagodzilla's mouth. Maybe we'll angle this just a little bit better. Yeah, there we go. Let's go ahead and actually move this to whenever Mechagodzilla opens his mouth to start. There we go. It's a little better. Okay, so now in the particle settings, we're going to set the particle type to a faded sphere. We'll maybe up the birth rate a little bit. And we'll decrease the birth size just a tad and up the death size. Bring up the max opacity. Set the variation to 100%. And we're going to use a custom color map here because the Mega Buster has this kind of rainbow hue to it. So what we're going to do is we're going to just play around with the color at birth and death and all the percentages in between. And just make something kind of rainbow-like. We'll also lower the longevity so that we get the whole gradient of particles before they leave the screen, because otherwise they're just all going to die before we even get to see the proper colors for them. Maybe we'll flip some of these around just a little bit. Play with the order that we want these in. It's not too important, but we are going to be changing the hue of this later, so it's not going to be super vital. And we'll set the transfer mode of these particles to add. Now I am going to play with the particle stream itself a little bit more here, so I'm going to turn down the extra in the physics just so we get a little bit more of a confined straight beam. Maybe we'll go back and play with the producer settings just a tad so that we can fix this around, maybe rotate it a bit more. Something like that's not too bad. And so real quick, let's go ahead and enable motion blur for this layer. So now you can see this effect starting to come together really. We're starting to get a very nice looking Mega Buster now. I upped the gravity more and I also lowered the longevity just so these particles flow even faster. And thanks to the motion blur, they kind of have this like little streak look to them that Mechagodzilla did in the movie. So next what I want to do is I want to add a hue and saturation effect to this layer. And so what we're going to do is, if you see, if we play with the hue wheel here, we're going to start to get some different colors out of this Megabuster ray the more that we spin this wheel around. So what we're going to do is we're going to set a keyframe for the channel range at the very beginning of the Megabuster. Go to the end and just, we'll set it to maybe 3 times 0. Yeah, so now as you can see, the color actually changes as we move along in the timeline. And we might actually want to make that even more. So we'll maybe bump it up to 6 or 7. Here we go. I'm liking this a lot. So I'm going to set the blend mode of this layer to screen as well, just so we get a nice cleaner blend with the overall image. So now normally the next step is to add a glow to this ray here. But the issue that we've kind of run into when we do that is if we add a glow, it looks nice, bump up the threshold, and then we kind of expand the glow radius. And it doesn't look bad. It kind of gives a nice little effect, but it doesn't really bring out the colors as much as we would want to. And obviously if we like try to play with the saturation or something, we don't really get any good results. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually duplicate this layer, and on that duplicated we'll delete the glow, and we're going to add a fast box blur to this one. Just expand that blur out, make sure we have repeat edge pixels on, something like that, and then we'll just set the blend mode to additive. So that still gives us like a nice bright glow effect while we still get to see some of the vibrant colors that are coming from this beam. So next, I'm really liking the way that the beam is looking, but because everything's colored and motion blur is enabled, we kind of lose some of the definition of these streaks that you normally get in the Megabuster effect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate the original Megabuster layer. We'll just go ahead and get rid of all these effects that we have stacked on there. We'll disable motion blur for now. And what we're going to do, we're going to go to the particle settings and change the type to, let's try lines. We'll lower the birth rate by quite a bit, just so we get something like this. We'll change the color map back to birth to death, and we'll just set it to white for both birth and death. Just so we're left with a simple stream of light particles that are being shot out here. And so if we stack these with the other Megabuster layers, you can already see that we're getting some of that good definition back. But we're going to enhance these a little bit more. We're going to add a glow effect and keep those glows pretty tight. We'll add a fast box blur, maybe just blur it by 1 pixel, maybe 0.5. Yeah, just something to soften them up a little bit just so they're not super crisp and clear. I'm actually liking that a lot. That fixes that up very nice, and we get some nice definition going on with the Megabuster here. So real quick, last final step that I want to do, the particles are just kind of appearing in Mechagodzilla's mouth, just materializing, which, you know, it's fine, but you don't really, the mouth's just not glowing for all this light that is coming out of it. So real quick, so let's duplicate the base Mechagodzilla layer. We'll just disable all those buster layers. We're going to draw just a quick and simple mask around the mouth. Just something like that. Nothing more complex needed. We're going to set the blend mode to screen. We'll go into our effects that we have on this layer and just delete everything. I'm going to add a glow. Bump up the threshold. Up the radius. Also feather this mask out. Now if we add our layers back, there we go. Mouth glows. And it just kind of sells the overall effect a little bit more. And what we can do to even enhance that more is if we set keyframes for the glow radius, we add a wiggle expression. So we just go here, we'll set the wiggle frequency to 23, and we'll try 50. See how that works for us. Yeah, so now like the glow kind of wiggles a little bit. Yeah, and so when you look at this in the main comp now, you can see the mouth glow kind of fluctuating as well, which looks a whole lot better. But yeah, obviously we gotta animate that real quick, so we'll just jump here to this frame, hit the mask path. We'll start we'll just start that layer when the Mega Buster beam starts. Quickly animate the mask to match Mechagodzilla's mouth. There we go. And that does it for that. You can do other effects, obviously, and add like a lens flare, you know, some good old Video Copilot optical flares into the mouth there. Maybe some dust effects and all that good stuff. But that is the Mega Buster beam itself. And we've got this looking pretty movie accurate, if I do say so myself. We can turn our color grade layers on and see how we're looking here. So that wraps up this episode of KaijuVFX. If there's a certain effect that you want to see done right away, consider supporting us over at Patreon, where we have a tier that you can request this type of video to be made with top priority instead of waiting for the storm of YouTube comments to be waded through and all those effects to be done. You know, if you want to see more of the Super Mechagodzilla effects, because he has a whole lot of weapons. If you want to see more of those, then you can hop on over to Patreon and request those. But that wraps up this video. That's enough for now. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll catch you guys here next time with whatever it is that I have to offer. I would like to give thanks to all of our current Patreon supporters, including Deadzilla, Goji73, Liquid Pestar, Project Godzilla, Kaiju Conversation Justice, Yao9, GWRzilla, Jeff King, Johnny Sacco, Mason Ramon, Ultriob, William Zorio, Kaiju X, and That One Godzilla Fan. If you want to see your name at the end of each of our videos as well, in addition to some other awesome rewards, then be sure to stop by patreon.com/DaikaijuLegends.